They used a massive organized scheme to frame me for handling forbidden substances, leaving me facing decades in prison for a crime I didn't commit. Now, I'm breaking back into the hospital at 2 a.m. to find the truth. But the radicals hunting me through the dark are carrying illegal weapons and have orders to leave no witnesses. They say a reputation takes a lifetime to build and only a single second to destroy. In my case, it took exactly 45 minutes, the duration of the emergency board meeting that stripped me of my license, my dignity, and my future. I had been the head of pediatrics at Oakwood Memorial for 12 years. I knew every family in this town, every secret whispered in the waiting room, and every heartbeat of the community. But in one afternoon, I became a pariah. They accused me of mishandling forbidden substances, claiming that a routine audit had found a massive discrepancy in my department's inventory. The evidence was irrefutable. Or so Dr. Thorne, the chief of staff, claimed with that sickeningly smug look on his face. He stood there, flanked by the board members, as they threw words at me like negligence, criminal intent, and organized scheme. They didn't just fire me, they made sure the entire town knew why. By the time I walked out of the hospital that day, the local news was already buzzing. My neighbors, people I'd treated for over a decade, looked away when I drove past. My phone was silent except for the cold, automated emails from legal counsel warning me of the decades in prison I could face if I didn't cooperate. I spent 3 days in a state of catatonic shock, staring at the walls of my small cottage. But tonight the shock turned into a cold, hard clarity. I knew I hadn't misplaced a single milligram of those forbidden substances. I was being framed, and I knew exactly where the proof of my innocence and their guilt was hidden. It was in my office, tucked behind the loose baseboard I'd never bothered to fix, inside a journal where I kept personal notes on the hospital's chaotic billing system. I chose 2 a.m. for my return. The hospital at night was a different beast. A labyrinth of sterile white corridors, bathed in the eerie, flickering glow of fluorescent lights. I parked 3 blocks away and walked through the pouring rain, my hood pulled low. My key card shouldn't have worked, but I knew the security guard on the night shift, old Arthur, always left the side-loading dock cracked open for his smoke breaks. The air inside the hospital smelled of bleach and old grief. It felt heavy, pressing against my lungs as I navigated the back stairwell. Every creak of the building sounded like a gunshot. I avoided the main elevators, sticking to the service halls where the janitors kept their carts. I felt like a thief in my own home. I reached the 3rd floor, pediatrics. My name was already gone from the door of the head office, replaced by a piece of white tape that simply said, Office 302. My hands trembled as I pushed the door open. The room had been tossed. Files were scattered, my desk was empty, and even my medical books had been shoved off the shelves. They weren't just looking for evidence. They were trying to erase me. I knelt by the wall, my fingers fumbling with the wooden baseboard. I pulled it back, my breath hitching as I felt the cold leather of my journal. I had it. I had the records of the special shipments Dr. Thorne had been receiving, shipments that never made it into the official logs. I was about to leave when I heard it, the heavy mechanical groan of the industrial freight elevator at the end of the hall. It was the only elevator that went down to the high-security basement. I froze. Nobody used that elevator at this hour. I crept to the door and peered through the small glass pane. 2 men emerged. One was Dr. Thorne, his expensive suit replaced by a dark windbreaker. The other was a man I'd never seen before, tall, rugged, with a jagged scar across his jaw and a look of cold, professional indifference. They weren't carrying medical charts. They were pushing a heavy, reinforced crate. As they passed my office, the man with the scar paused, his head turning slightly toward my door. I ducked beneath the frame, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst. "Is it all here?" I heard the stranger ask, his voice like grinding gravel. "Every gram," Thorne replied, his voice shaking. "But the internal security check is tightening. We need to move the rest of the forbidden substances tonight. If the investigation goes deeper than the doctor we framed, we're all dead." The stranger grunted, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a heavy, metallic object that glinted under the hallway lights. An unlawful weapon, sleek and lethal. He checked the chamber with a sickening click. "Then make sure there are no more witnesses," he whispered. The sound of their footsteps faded as they moved toward the basement stairs. I realized then that I wasn't just looking at a case of administrative corruption. I had stumbled into a massive, organized scheme that went far beyond the hospital walls. I clutched my journal to my chest, realizing I had to get out. But as I turned to the window to plan my escape, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A third man was standing in the shadows of the parking lot, staring directly up at my office window, a radio pressed to his lips. And then the handle of my office door began to slowly, silently turn. The door handle rattled, a slow, deliberate sound that felt like a serrated blade scraping against my nerves. I didn't have time to think. I dove behind the heavy oak desk, pressing my back against the cold wood, pulling my knees to my chest. The door creaked open and a sliver of light from the hallway cut through the darkness of the room. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps entered. It wasn't the frantic pace of a security guard or the nervous shuffle of Dr. Thorne. These were the measured, heavy steps of a predator. I held my breath until my lungs screamed for air, clutching the leather journal to my heart as if it were a shield. The beam of a high-powered flashlight swept across the room, illuminating the chaos of my ransacked office. It lingered on the desk, then moved to the wall where I had pulled back the baseboard. A low, guttural curse echoed in the room. "The board is empty," a voice whispered into a radio. It was the man with the scar. "She's been here. She has the records. Find her. She can't leave the building with those papers." The footsteps retreated, but I didn't move. I waited until I heard the heavy thud of the door closing and the click of the lock from the outside. He hadn't just left. He had trapped me. My mind raced through the layout of the pediatrics wing. There was a connecting door in the back of the office that led to the shared laboratory, but it was usually kept locked from the other side for safety. I scrambled to the side door, my fingers trembling as I gripped the handle. It was locked. I was a rat in a maze, and the exterminators were closing in. I looked at the window, but we were 3 stories up, and the ledge was slick with rain. Then I remembered the ventilation shaft. It was old, a remnant of the building's original construction, wide enough for a person to crawl through if they were desperate enough. I dragged a chair to the corner, unscrewing the vent cover with a letter opener I found on the floor. My hands were slick with sweat, making every turn of the screw an agonizing struggle. Just as the last screw fell, I heard voices in the hallway, multiple people this time. "Check the stairwell, seal the exits." Thorne's voice was high-pitched, bordering on frantic. "If that journal gets to the internal security check, we're finished. Everything we've built, the entire organized scheme, will collapse." I pulled myself into the narrow, dusty duct just as the office door was kicked open. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the vent. I froze, my body pressed against the cold metal as light flooded the office below. I could see the man with the scar through the slats of the vent I hadn't yet replaced. He looked up, his eyes narrowing as they landed on the empty chair beneath the open duct. "She's in the vents," he roared. I scrambled backward, the metal groaning under my weight. I didn't know where the duct led, only that I had to keep moving. I crawled through layers of dust and cobwebs, the sound of my own frantic breathing amplified in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, the duct sloped downward and I slid, landing hard on a pile of laundry bags in the basement level, the very place Thorne and the stranger had been heading. I emerged from the laundry chute, gasping for air. The basement was a labyrinth of concrete pillars and buzzing electrical boxes. I stayed in the shadows, moving toward the high-security storage area where the forbidden substances were kept. If I was going down, I was going to take the evidence of their entire operation with me. I rounded a corner and stopped dead. The reinforced crate I'd seen earlier was open. Inside weren't just canisters of medical supplies. There were stacks of cash, encrypted hard drives, and several illegal weapons, the kind used by radicals to ensure silence. This wasn't just a hospital theft, this was a hub for a massive criminal network. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I took photos of the contents. My flash went off, the white light momentarily blinding me in the dim basement. I cursed under my breath and turned to run, but a cold, hard circle of metal pressed into the back of my neck. "You always were too curious for your own good, Doctor." Dr. Thorne's voice hissed in my ear. He wasn't alone. Standing behind him were two local police officers I recognized, men I had trusted, men whose children I had treated. They weren't there to rescue me. They were holding their own weapons, their faces set in grim masks of betrayal. Thorne reached around and snatched the journal from my hand, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "You thought you were the hero of this story? You're just the fall girl, and now you're a liability we can no longer afford to keep." He stepped back, nodding to the officers. "Make it look like a tragic accident. A disgraced doctor, overcome by the guilt of her crimes, decides to end it all in the basement of the hospital she betrayed." As the officers stepped forward, one of them reached for a heavy metal pipe on the wall. But before he could swing, the heavy steel doors of the loading dock exploded inward with a deafening crash. A flashbang grenade skittered across the concrete floor, detonating in a blinding burst of white light and sound. Through the ringing in my ears and the spots in my eyes, I saw a team of black-clad figures swarming the room. They weren't local police. They moved with a lethal, synchronized precision. One of them tackled the man with the scar, while another pinned Dr. Thorne to the wall. A man in a dark tactical vest stepped into the center of the room, his face obscured by a mask. He looked at me, then at the crate of illegal weapons and forbidden substances. He pulled a radio from his belt. "We have the primary target and the evidence," he said, his voice cold and robotic. "But there's a problem. The doctor is still alive. What are the orders for the witness?" There was a long pause, the static on the radio sounding like a death knell. Then a voice came through, a voice I recognized as the mayor of our town, the man who had signed my termination papers. "The doctor knows too much about the network," the mayor's voice crackled. "Clean up the mess. No witnesses. Repeat. No witnesses." The man in the mask looked at me, his hand moving slowly toward the holster at his hip. I realized then that the internal security check wasn't coming to save me. They were the ones who had built the cage in the first place. I backed away, my heel catching on the edge of the open crate, and as I fell, my hand brushed against something heavy and cold, hidden beneath the stacks of cash. My fingers closed around the cold metallic edge of a tablet. the master control for the hospital's secure logistics and high-level communications. As I pulled it from beneath the stacks of cash, the screen flared to life, showing a live encrypted feed. It wasn't just a ledger, it was the organized scheme in digital form, showing every shipment of forbidden substances, every bribe paid to the local police, and the GPS coordinates for every drop-off point in the state. "The witness," the mayor's voice repeated over the radio, cold and final. "Eliminator!" The man in the mask raised his weapon, the barrel a black void pointed directly at my head. But he didn't know this basement like I did. Before he could pull the trigger, I slammed my palm onto the red emergency override button on the wall behind me. I had spent a decade in this building. I knew that this specific button didn't just trigger a fire alarm, it activated the surgical-grade sterilization protocol for the containment zone. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and a thick white cloud of pressurized suppression gas hissed from the ceiling vents. The room was plunged into a blinding fog. The tactical team began to cough, their specialized masks not designed for this specific chemical concentration. Shots rang out, the bullets pinging harmlessly off the concrete pillars as the criminals fired blindly into the haze. I stayed low, crawling through the mist, using the tablet's glowing screen as a guide. I navigated by memory, reaching the main electrical breaker for the basement level. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw the master switch. The lights died and the entire wing was plunged into total darkness, save for the flickering red of the emergency strobes. I found my way to the freight elevator's manual controls. Thorne was screaming somewhere in the dark, his voice cracking with terror. "Where is she? Find her!" "I'm right here, Thorne," I whispered, though the gas and the distance muffled my voice. I didn't need to fight them, I just needed to broadcast the truth. Using the tablet, I accessed the hospital's public address system. My fingers flew across the screen, bypassing the security layers I had studied months ago during a routine IT upgrade. Suddenly, my voice, and the mayor's recorded command, boomed through every speaker in the entire hospital, from the lobby to the recovery rooms. I played the recording of the mayor's voice. "Clean up the mess. No witnesses." I didn't stop there. I uploaded the logs of the forbidden substances directly to the state's internal verification team and the regional news network simultaneously. The organized scheme was being disassembled in real time. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Not the local police sirens, but the heavy, rhythmic beat of the state's high-level internal security units. They had been monitoring the network for months, waiting for a breach in the encryption. My upload had been the key they needed to move in. The basement doors were breached again, this time by a legitimate force. Through the dissipating gas, I saw the man with the scar try to flee, but he was neutralized instantly. Dr. Thorne was found huddled in a corner, clutching a briefcase of cash, his face a mask of pathetic desperation. The two corrupt officers dropped their weapons, realizing their protection had evaporated. As the state agents secured the room, a woman in a gray suit approached me. She showed me her badge, Internal Security. "Dr. Sarah Miller?" she asked, her voice calm. "We've been trying to get a man on the inside for a year. You just did our job for us in 20 minutes. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The mayor was arrested at his home before sunrise, facing a laundry list of charges that would ensure he spent an enormous srock, decades, if not the rest of his life, behind bars. Dr. Thorne and the rest of the board members were led out of the hospital in handcuffs, their faces plastered across every news station under the headline of a major organized scheme. My license was not only restored, but the state issued a formal apology. The town, once so quick to judge, was silent in its collective shame. They tried to offer me my old job back, but I declined. I couldn't walk those halls without seeing the ghosts of the betrayal. Instead, I opened a private clinic on the outskirts of town, funded by the whistleblower reward from the Internal Review Board. I still keep the leather journal from my office, but now it's filled with the names of healthy children, not the logs of a criminal network. I learned a hard lesson that night. A reputation can be destroyed in a second, but the truth has a way of cutting through the darkest night. I walked back into that hospital a disgraced doctor, but I walked out as the woman who broke the town's greatest shadow. And as for Thorne and the mayor, they found out that when you try to break a doctor, you better make sure she doesn't know exactly where your weaknesses are hidden.